ABC News Magazine 2020 with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters.
Tonight, in mid-America, in places like Lafayette, Indiana, the AIDS virus has taken root.
It just can't happen here, but it can.
This young mother is a victim.
They were telling me at that time, don't tell anyone what's wrong with you.
She isn't spreading AIDS, but in her town, ordinary people are.
Who knows how many people they're transmitting it to?
Geraldo Rivera with the facts, a warning, and one woman's story. AIDS in the heartland. And Mexico's tragedy. 2020 was there as Mexico City's survivors searched for their loved ones. We'll chronicle 24 hours of tension and joy, sorrow and hope. Placido Domingo searching for his relatives. A man's frantic search for his family. Everyone racing the clock to save those still alive. ABC News correspondent Judd Rose joins 2020 with an eyewitness account of Mexico's moment of crisis.
I think public opinion now has turned somewhat against it.
America's military machine, enormous might that cost you and me plenty. Now there's new pressure to cut costs.
We shouldn't have 25 ways to kill a Soviet.
Military chiefs know where the fat is, but seem unable to cut it. With Congress ready to act, Tom Jarrell investigates, where does the money go? AIDS. Here's what's new. The latest ABC News Washington Post poll shows that 4 out of 5 Americans believe AIDS now poses a threat to the general public. And the Center for Disease Control has now confirmed that heterosexuals can transmit and are transmitting AIDS virus. In a moment, Geraldo Rivera's report will show how heterosexual men and women are passing it, even in America's small towns. First, we want to remind you that what's commonly known as AIDS is actually the third and final stage of a viral infection. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, affects the body's immune system. Simply put, the immune system fights disease and illness. Now again, AIDS has 3 stages. First, a person contracts AIDS virus. There are no apparent symptoms and the person remains in general good health. Some, but not all, progress to the next stage, AIDS-related complex, or ARC. The immune system begins to deteriorate. The person's health begins to suffer. From the ARC stage, some, but not all, develop a full-blown case of AIDS disease. The immune system is virtually destroyed, and it is from this stage that, to date, no one has recovered. Now, in what's essentially a pyramid effect, the number of people in each stage breaks down like this. An estimated 1 to 2 million people now carry the AIDS virus. 1 out of 10 of them may advance to ARC, AIDS-related complex. An estimated 150,000 people are now in the ARC stage, and 1 out of 10 of these may advance to the fatal stage, AIDS disease. Over 13,000 people have contracted AIDS disease, and over 6,000 have already died. Now, as people in all stages transmit AIDS, it will continue to spread, doubling every year. So far, no one knows where it will stop. And now, in Geraldo's report, you'll see why AIDS is not just a gay epidemic, it is everyone's epidemic.
Lafayette, Indiana, a small city surrounded by field and farm. It's a college town located just far enough away to be free of many of the problems and much of the tension that can complicate big city life. On a typical Sunday morning, young men fish the Wabash River. Main Street is practically deserted. Many families are in church, like the Sloans, Amy and Steve. They've been married now for 3 years and in most respects seem a typical young couple. Amy worked as a dental technician. Steve works nights for a supermarket chain. Everything was on track for them until Amy came down with AIDS.
I got AIDS through a blood transfusion.
Amy received her transfusion in December of 1982. She felt fine for the next year and a half until last May.
I was having trouble breathing. I was having trouble sleeping, getting really tired. And I'd been going to a clinic trying to get help to different doctors, and no one could find anything that was wrong with me.
Amy's experience has been echoed all across the country, as AIDS, in a sense, has become an all-American epidemic. Because most of the early cases were confined to gay men living in big cities, many doctors outside those big cities were lulled into thinking it could never happen here. Caught off guard, as in Amy's case, many of them failed even to recognize the disease.
One doctor that I seen a week before I was in intensive care told me that I was as healthy as the day I was born, that I should go home and forget about it. And then that very next week was when I was in intensive care dying.
She had these terrible fevers. And when she was in intensive care, and she was so hot. Oh, so hot. So I just bathed her. I just kept bathing her and bathing her in the cool water because it felt so good to her. And she was so hot. And they cautioned me, and the nurse told me that I should not be doing that because they didn't know what she had. And I said I really didn't care what she had. I had bathed her and cared for her since the day she was born, and I was not going to stop then.
What was Amy's condition when you first saw her?
She was very close to respiratory failure, and I think if we waited much longer, she probably would have died.
Dr. David Emery had seen these cases before and recognized Amy's rare form of pneumonia as a symptom of AIDS. With his help, she came through that first crisis, but she's not cured. In that sense, AIDS can be compared to a fatal cancer. No. For now, it's in remission.
There is no doubt in my mind what my end would have been had I not found Dr. Emery. And this scares me because I'm sure that there are a lot of people that have already died from this because it was undiagnosed, and that there probably are people laying in hospitals right now that are dying from this because it is undiagnosed. They don't think to look for AIDS if you're not in one of the common risk groups.
You know, this is a pretty typical Midwestern town, and it's a disease that you read about in the newspaper and happens in other cities, and it just can't happen here, but it can. And I think it's something we need to be prepared to deal with.
They were telling me at that time, don't tell anyone what's wrong with you. Keep it quiet, because if you tell the public, there's going to be a big upheaval, and the public is going to be very concerned.
Amy's doctors were concerned about an outbreak of public panic, and from places as diverse as New York City and Kokomo, Indiana, recent events demonstrate how potent the fear of AIDS can be.
It is true that some medical sources have said that this cannot be communicated in any way other than the ones we already know, and which would not involve a child being in the school. And yet medicine has not come forth unequivocally and said, this we know for a fact, that it is safe.
With all due respect to the president, according to the experts at the Centers for Disease Control, the scientific evidence is solid. Yes, a mother can give it to her unborn and perhaps to her nursing child. Yes, you can get AIDS from bad blood. Yes, you can get it from infected needles. Aside from those known avenues, the only way you can get AIDS is by having sex with someone who has the AIDS virus. That's not a theory. That's a fact. Of the more than 13,000 documented cases in this country, no one, not a single person, has gotten AIDS because of casual contact. You don't get this disease by sitting alongside or studying with or even eating with an AIDS patient.
You know, Bill, just as Amy serves, you wonder about the fear, the unfounded fear that people have of AIDS victims handling food, for instance. What do you think about it? Have you ever been frightened by it?
I've never been frightened of it. I think it's a bunch of crap. I think we really all know that it's not contagious. We don't, it's been very misinformed.
Hi, good morning.
Like her family, Amy's fellow worshipers know that AIDS cannot be contracted by a simple hug or kiss.
I have a very good church family that has supported us in every way from the very beginning of this. It always has been acceptance and love and concern. That's what Christianity is all about.
And Amy and Steve have needed all the support they could get.
I found out that I was pregnant on a Wednesday, and I found out that I had AIDS on Friday, 2 days later.
Remember, AIDS can pass from a mother to her unborn child.
It was literally 9 months of hell until that child was born. And even when he was born, that was scary.
Some babies come down with the disease, some do not. As yet, research does not know why. Brant is now 8 months old. His blood is regularly tested, and so far, he's fine, thriving and showing no sign of the disease. But like every other person who's been exposed to AIDS, the incubation period can be as long as 5 years. Although Steve was sexually exposed to the virus for the year and a half before Amy had symptoms, tests show he did not contract it. To ensure his continued safety, Steve and Amy take the recommended precautions.
We don't use the same toothbrush or the same razor for the fact of, passing blood that way. We use condoms, and we don't kiss intimately. It's pretty much dry kissing.
So the whole idea is that you don't exchange
body fluids, right?
Because AIDS is incurable, and because there's no vaccine to protect against it, people have to take responsibility for themselves. Remember, this is a sexually transmitted disease. That means you have to fight against it in the same way you fight against any other form of VD. If you're not monogamous, if you're sleeping with more than one person, then for goodness sakes, don't exchange body fluids. You don't take them, and you don't give them. It's called safe sex. And you'll find the best method of protection on the shelf of any drugstore in Lafayette, Indiana, or any other drugstore in the country. Whether you call them condoms or rubbers or prophylactics, use them, because AIDS involves other people than just yourself.
I carried this virus around for a year and a half, having no idea in the world that I was ill. I felt fine. I lived normally, and we had no idea. So, of course, during that time, we weren't taking any precautions or altering our lifestyle in any way. So there are a lot of people that are walking around carrying this virus that who knows how many people they're transmitting it to.
As you know, Amy got AIDS from a blood transfusion. But the development and rapid deployment of an effective AIDS blood test has made the nation's blood supply much safer than it was when she got infected. So in that sense, at least, her sad story is the story of AIDS past. Here from the campus of Lafayette's most celebrated resident, Purdue University, comes the story of AIDS' future. It's the story of two university students, a man and a woman. This is the story of Jack and Diane.
Have you been tested for the AIDS antibody?
Yes, I have.
The results?
Positive.
Like an estimated 1 million+ people in this country, Jack's blood shows signs of exposure to the AIDS virus. But so far, he's not ill.
You don't have to worry simply about the illness. You have to worry about the reactions of other people and the treatment you're going to receive if they find out about it.
Jack's girlfriend Diane's case is more advanced. Like 150,000 other Americans, she has what's called ARC, AIDS-related complex. No one can say when or even if Jack or Diane will develop the full-blown AIDS syndrome. Neither knows who was infected first. As with all venereal diseases, the arithmetic is frightening. And remember, millions are as sexually active as these two. Diane has been sleeping with Jack for over a year. Jack is married to Mary. Jack has also maintained a sexual relationship with another man, Jim, who's married to Wendy. Diane hasn't been exclusive to Jack either, so you can see how the epidemic is growing, doubling its number of victims every year.
Have you told your wife yet that you tested positive?
No.
Have you told your male lover?
No.
Do you intend to?
Yes.
How long have you known?
About 2 weeks.
Are you still having sexual relations with your wife?
Yes.
What about your male friend?
No.
Are you taking precautions?
No. No precautions.
And can it be said, can it be viewed as you're condemning her?
If there's a chance that she's not contracted it, yeah, that's true.
It's something that can touch everybody's life, and the ways in which it can touch them are basically now in sexual contact. It doesn't mean that if they are leading a monogamous lifestyle that their partner is also.
I never was very promiscuous. I didn't get out really that much. But if I've got it, I know that there is a tremendous amount of guys in this community that have it.
Jack and Diane are in shadow, obviously because they fear public exposure. For the same reason, another patient in this community was yet more frightened. He refused even to meet with us face to face. On the telephone with me now is a young man in his early 30s who belongs to none of the traditional high-risk groups. That means he's not an IV drug user. He says he has never had a homosexual experience, and yet he has come down with AIDS-related complex. Is that about the situation, George?
That's true.
All right, now, how do you think you got infected?
Well, I think that I might have become infected through heterosexual contact with a great number of different women.
But how many sexual contacts did you have with women in a year, say?
Oh, between 6 and 10 in a year's time.
Have you told your wife yet that you are AIDS virus positive?
I have indeed.
Has she been tested?
No, she refuses testing.
Why?
Her fear is that she just does not want the stigma attached to even an HCLV3 positive test.
Dr. James Curran keeps track of the AIDS epidemic for the Centers for Disease Control.
It's now quite clear that sexual transmission can occur among heterosexual men and women as well as homosexual men and women. From the very beginning, 25% of cases have been among heterosexual men and women. We've been able to deny that those people, too, are sexually active. We've been able to deny them because they were hemophiliacs, they were Haitian, they were intravenous drug users. But they, too, are sexually active from the very beginning. And it's inevitable that the risk will increase for heterosexual men and women as well.
So the genie is out of the bottle, in a sense.
The genie has been out of the bottle, and now we realize it.
But what are we going to do for the million-plus Americans, like Amy Sloan, already infected with this virus?
Most experts agree that the last best chance of a person infected with the AIDS virus is being treated as soon as possible with one of the experimental drugs that fight that virus, like HPA-23, the drug Rock Hudson went to Paris to try. Well, last week, HPA-23 was approved for testing in this country. But the way things stand right now, Amy has very little chance of getting into one of those experimental programs.
These programs all require regular access to sophisticated laboratories like this one at Harvard University, where the continuing effects of a drug on the virus itself can be studied. With only about 10 such labs in the entire country, there just aren't enough facilities to go around.
You just can't be in being Little Mary Sunshine from Lafayette, Indiana. You just can't call up and say, I'm sick and I need help. Will you help me? They'll just tell you no.
The bottom line to this report is that the old stereotypes no longer apply. This dreadful disease is not a gay plague contained to a handful of big cities. It's everybody's problem now, the all-American epidemic.
What do you think's going to happen to him?
I think I'm probably going to die. I'd like to think that I could raise my son and be a real influence on him and on the world, because I think that I have something really important to say. But realistically, I think I'm probably going to die. I think that I got this too soon. Maybe people that get this 5 or 10 years from now are going to be able to live through it. But I have my doubts whether I'm going to be one of those people or not.
Oh, Geraldo, and she's only 24.
One of the nicest people they ever met, just a doll.
There are still relatively few heterosexual cases of AIDS in this country.
Just about 130, 135.
That's quite small, and the chances of getting it now from blood transfusions are slim, if none.
Right, it's going down, way down. Right. The problem with forecasting is 4 years ago, that's how many homosexual cases there were. You know, just about 100 or so, 150 or so. Now there are 13,000 cases total, and I think you can project, you know, with this huge incubation period, 3, 4, 5 years, the number of cases is going to double and double and double.
One thing we do know from your piece, people are so worried about kissing on the cheek or shaking hands, but what it really means is it is sexual contact primarily, and And if you don't want to have AIDS, that's what you must avoid.
That's right. Moderate your sexual behavior. This is a sexually transmitted disease. If you're not going around with other people, you'll be okay. I mean, if your partner isn't either. I mean, that's the bottom line. Morality and good sense are parallel in this case.
Thank you, Geraldo.
Well, next, Mexico's tragedy. They've been searching the rubble for 8 days. We will relive one 24-hour period. People racing the clock to save people. A moment of crisis right after this.
"2020", sponsored by BMW.
At this hour in Mexico City, the search continues for people who may be trapped under concrete and steel. The hope is real. This afternoon, workers rescued a nurse buried since last Thursday in the rubble of her hospital. And tonight, ABC News correspondent Judd Rose joins us with a dramatic account. It's the pictures and emotion of one 24-hour period, a minute-by-minute account of a few people desperately searching for their loved ones.
Midnight in Mexico City. A harvest moon rose overhead, lighting up the sky and shining down over hell on earth. As Sunday became Monday, almost 90 hours had passed since the earthquake that turned Benito Juarez Hospital into a tomb. And it was almost 30 hours since French rescue workers heard some faint sounds. They knew there was still someone in there, someone alive. 600 people, maybe more, had been inside when this 9-story hospital became a 100-foot pile of rubble. One of them, a young medical student, had survived 5 days in an air pocket. To get him out now would be perhaps the most complex and delicate operation ever performed here. To tunnel through tons of concrete and metal rods, all poised to shift and tumble again. Men passed wreckage hand to hand like some ghostly bucket brigade. 2:45, tunneling inside the ruins, rescue workers are blocked by a body. Time is short, and they do what they have to. They get a power saw and cut the corpse in two, and they move on. 5:25, and Juan Jose Hernandez Cruz finally crawls the last few feet to freedom. He's made it to Monday, the day after his 23rd birthday, and now it's dawn. First light comes about 6:45 at the intersection of Chola and Castilla Streets, and we watch a German team search what's left of a 9-story apartment building. Guiding them through the rubble, dogs specially trained to sniff out the scent of a human, dead or alive.
The dogs seem to have found about 10 to 11 places where there are some people. We cannot decide up to now if they are living or not, but there might be some traces of living people around here.
David Lopez listens closely to what the doctor says. Somewhere under these tons of concrete is his third-floor apartment. Inside it are his wife and daughters. One is 3, the other 2. There are no signs of life here, but earlier he found his dog alive, so maybe, just maybe. Searchers sprinkled chalk in places that the dogs have pinpointed. It's 8 in the morning, and soon they'll start to dig. Like many other big earthquakes, in this one, the difference between life and death, survival and disaster, was a fine line, and one that didn't seem to make any particular sense. Nowhere in Mexico City did you understand that better than here at an apartment complex called Tlatelolco. Among a forest of high-rise buildings, only one, that one, collapsed onto itself when the earth shook. At 9:10, the air is foul with dust and the stink of bodies rotting in the rubble. We wear masks, everyone does, to keep out the smell and the dust and the disease. There are perhaps 1,200 people crushed in what was a 13-story tower. Incredibly, some are still alive. Are there more people alive in there, she asks. Yes, he says, 4, maybe more. God only knows. He is Placido Domingo, the opera star. Born in Spain, raised in Mexico, Domingo has flown here to find his uncle, his aunt, and 2 cousins who lived in this building.
We have hope because right now they are finding people still alive. This is a tragedy that you hear about, but you don't realize until you are there, and much worse.
But now it's 10:30 Monday, and for many, all hope is gone. We watch them come in a steady stream to this makeshift morgue. Mothers looking for sons, wives looking for husbands, and brothers seeking sisters. They walk among the dead to try and find a familiar face. What we're hunting for is not here, she says, but even those who don't find someone break down.
I am feeling strong, but it's very hard. We have never seen too many people die in my country. And it's too hard.
We can show you the grief and the horror, but how can we tell you what it smelled like? The sour smell of death, the acid smell of disinfectant. They sprayed it on the bodies and covered them with ice because by now they were beginning to bloat. It had been more than 5 days by Monday at noon. At midday, the funerals began at a cemetery southeast of the city. 2:20 Monday afternoon. They've begun digging at Chola and Castilla. A bulldozer clears the large pieces of debris, and dust whirls into our eyes and our throats. Then the searchers move in to work by hand, and David Lopez joins them. He knows if there's any chance his wife and daughters are still alive, the rubble must be moved slowly, carefully, so they won't be crushed. Despite the scope of the disaster, much of Mexico City was untouched. And after 5 days, stores began to reopen. People went back to work, and traffic slowed to a snarl. In other words, it was business as usual in a city that, as of Monday, had more than 4,000 dead, more than 8,000 injured, and more than 2,000 missing. And perhaps 350,000 homeless. They filled the streets of the Mexican capital. If you drove anywhere in town on this day, you'd see them looking for a place to stay. At 3, it was hot and dusty. People were thirsty. A fifth of the 18 million who live here were still without clean water, so they lined up for that. Getting water was easier than other relief. At 4:10, Placido Domingo was on a car phone. Regular phone service was still unreliable. And he was using his celebrity status to request supplies for rescue workers at Tlatelolco. He wanted stretchers and emergency lamps and goggles and boots. Domingo talked on. Even in tragedy, he was playing to a capacity crowd. Across the street, they'd found one more survivor, but by 5 o'clock, all we could see and all we could smell coming out of the ruins was death. 6 o'clock, and a city that had been living on borrowed time was finally running out of it. When we got back to Chola and Castilla, there were 4 or maybe 5 times as many men tearing through the wreckage of the apartment building. We talked to a man whose 2 children were crushed inside there. Martin Ortega had been outside for more than 90 hours.
I don't even have any strength left to talk to you about all this because I'm only thinking about my children. I can't sleep for one reason only, thinking that if I shut my eyes for a moment, I can still see my children. And so I can't close my eyes because I can't see my children the way I should. Instead, I see them crushed into pieces, suffering. Who knows? All the things that can happen to them.
David Lopez had by now also been here for 90 hours or more, but at dusk, his ordeal was ending. They found his wife and his children huddled nearby. It was Monday. It was 6:30. But the drama of this day wasn't over yet. At about 8:30 in the evening, search teams here at Juarez Hospital said they heard noises from somewhere inside the wreckage. Noises, they said, indicated to them that there were still people alive somewhere in there. From the stillness, there they were again, human sounds. The searchers tunneled in and found steel bars. They sawed through the bars of a maternity ward crib, and at 11:15, a newborn baby girl was carefully wrapped in a thermal blanket and carried to the ground. Okay, cut and bruised, but she was well enough to yawn. They called her Baby Soriano. She didn't have a first name yet. She'd only been born the night before the quake. It had been a place for healing. Now it was home to misery and suffering and death. But at least one more time, a life had been saved at Juarez Hospital. She would be one of the last. It was midnight. A life was beginning, a day was ending, and Mexico's agony went on.
What a miracle, that infant. Judd, if this were to happen in an American city, a quake, for example, we hear that California is, so vulnerable. What happens in our cities? Are we protected?
Nobody can be totally protected, but American cities that are on fault lines, like Los Angeles and San Francisco, have started to stage annual earthquake preparedness drills so that the emergency services people are ready. And we've enacted stronger earthquake codes for buildings, public buildings and hospitals and structures like that, things that Mexico certainly didn't have.
What a tragedy, and what a joy to see a life like that.
Even if you don't believe in miracles, you kind of have to believe in some of these.
Sure. Thank you, Chad.
Well, next, solving a mystery. There are ways to cut military costs and yet make the military more effective. Former Pentagon chiefs know how. They answer Tom Gerald's question, where does the money go? Right after this.
Your money. America's military machine demands it. Now Congress is forcing cutbacks, and there are easy ways to cut costs. Tom Gerald investigates. Where does the money go? When 2020 continues.
It's our money, yours and mine. We don't send a check every month, but it is our money that powers America's military. But in Washington this week, a debate is getting hot. How and how much to cut military spending and save our tax dollars? And a push is on. Next week, Congressman Les Aspin of the House Armed Services Committee will hold hearings to answer his question, quote, where did the $1 trillion go? Tom Gerald, in a 2020 investigation, has come up with some answers that are both surprising and disturbing.
This is the multi-service open house at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington. It's a scene of pride, pomp, and pageantry. Military morale and dedication are the highest they've been in years. But behind the facade of multi-service togetherness lies a military system that is racked with inter-service rivalry, duplication of weaponry, and overlap of commands, which bloat the Pentagon's budget and make its operations cumbersome. A quick look right here at Andrews provides a clue. Question: who has an Air Force? Answer: the Air Force has one. The Army has one. The Navy has one. And the Marines have one. The symptoms of overkill have been there all along. For years, reformers have tinkered, studies have been commissioned, and reports on revamping the Pentagon's basic structure have gathered dust inside the federal bureaucracy. But now the chorus of Pentagon critics is growing louder and more forceful. Now that chorus is starting to be heard, because now the proposals for basic reform are coming from people who were at the top, in here. Former secretaries of defense, chiefs of military commands, and chiefs of services. Serious and respected military men who are committed to the defense of the country.
We shouldn't have 25 ways to kill a Soviet tank and have 3 or 4 of those within a given service.
Among those reformers, Army General Volney Warner, former head of the Readiness Command.
This range, and then in a more orderly fashion, try and discipline the services so that they don't each prepare for their own war.
General Edward Meyer, former Chief of Staff of the Army.
There is one element that has been constant that occurred in Grenada, which has been constant in all the operations since World War II, and that is some of the inability of the services to be able to operate under one another's command.
General David Jones, former Chief of Staff of the Air Force and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
When you get to the Pentagon, you really have to understand that bureaucracy and how to work within it.
The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was at the pinnacle of that bureaucracy as the country's top soldier and chief military advisor to 2 presidents. He believes the office he headed needs radical reform because of relentless turf fighting among the military chiefs.
Each service chief has risen to his top position partly by virtue of his career-long loyalty and devotion to his respective service. But once a service chief becomes a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he's required to act in the best interest of the armed forces in general, not his particular service. It's this dual role by its very nature which creates a conflict of interest. The Pentagon critics contend makes coherent military planning almost impossible.
I very often would go in and realize that when I would have to take a vote on an issue and have to take a vote that was contrary to what the people within my own service felt, that I had the possibility of losing the support of some of the people within my own service.
May 1980, the best Pentagon planning was reduced to wreckage, ashes, and retreat from Iranian soil. The bid to rescue the American hostages in Tehran never got past the landing point, Desert One. Dr. Edward Ludwak of Georgetown University is one of a growing chorus of Pentagon critics who contend our military today is a dismal mess, doomed to repeat its past failures.
Desert One is the most serious failure because it was program failure. The very plan was fatally flawed. You had Marine pilots flying Navy helicopters to take Army troops to rendezvous with Air Force aircraft. It was a grotesque plan whose only purpose was to satisfy the insistence of the different services that each of them should have a share.
It wasn't a set out, okay, we've got 4 services, we got to give each one a role.
They weren't arguing? Each guy saying,
each
I want to roll
arguing
in this is a major operation.
But I think it was based on a conviction, not a parochial interest, I want my service in here. It was this basic conviction that my service can do it best.
Desert One was a failure, but Grenada, billed as a victory, revealed exactly the same problems of inter-service rivalry. ABC News national security correspondent John McWethy.
The Marines invaded the northern part of the island, and the 82nd Airborne and the Rangers took the southern part of the island. And one of the really telling remarks about how they worked together was that they had to have translators, in essence, to deal with what the other service was saying. The Marines didn't understand what the Army was talking about, and the Army didn't understand what the Marines were talking about. Translators.
This was under combat.
This was in a combat situation.
Neither of them could really fight fast. They had to be very careful of not killing one another. Hence, it took several days for several thousand elite troops to defeat perhaps 42 or 50 military-trained Cubans, a few hundred other amateurs, and some grenadiers.
The Grenada battle, a land battle, was orchestrated by a Navy admiral. Why? Well, Grenada is an island, and it falls under our Atlantic Command. In fact, to fulfill our defense responsibilities worldwide, we've divided the entire globe into 6 multi-service commands called Unified Commands. There are the European and Southern Commands, headed by Army officers. There are the Atlantic and Pacific Commands, headed by naval officers. And there are 2 separate commands for rapid deployment of troops to hotspots. This has resulted in a worldwide command structure which is confusing and often inefficient.
Perhaps the clearest distortion in command structure can be found here at MacDill Air Force Base outside Tampa, Florida, where the Readiness Command, which is headquartered here, is headed by a 4-star Army general. And just a few blocks away, we find the Central Command, headed by another 4-star Army general. Each face off across the tarmac.
The Readiness Command was set up after World War II. It contains Army and Tactical Air Force units for rapid deployment to the Third World in general. The Central Command was set up very recently for rapid deployment to the Persian Gulf and Horn of Africa, specifically. When that happened, General Volney Warner, former head of the Readiness Command, took early retirement. He quit.
I did regard it as a duplication, unnecessarily so.
Your command was watered down.
That's a fair statement. And I think my words at one point were we ought to yank the services together in peacetime. Well, I yanked, but they weren't on the other end of the rope. But we gave it a good try. Of course, in my view, we failed. And now you see the services still structuring for their own eventuality of being able to deploy as a service if needed.
So who's in charge if a crisis flares up in, say, Somalia or Oman, where we have bases?
Officially, the Central Command, formerly the Rapid Deployment Force, is in charge of any crisis in the Persian Gulf countries. But the Central Command is a headquarters without forces of its own, no troops. So the troopless four-star Army general who heads the Central Command must go a few blocks away, across MacDill Air Force Base here, to the Readiness Command to draw his forces.
Except that ships coming in will be coming in from the Pacific Command. And from the European Command, so that it really would have to be a coordination of three different commands, one in Europe, one in Florida, and one in Honolulu.
So while a crisis could flare, you could have all of the commands trying to decide how to get there and who's in charge?
While the crisis flared, you'd have the commands at least negotiating.
But even negotiations can't resolve the question in the field of who's in charge here. On October 23rd, 1983, as American Marines were being pulled out of the rubble of their Beirut compound, no one knew who was responsible for putting all those Marines and their commanding officer in such a vulnerable position.
They were Marines on the ground in Beirut. But he reported to someone in the Navy, who reported to someone in the Army, who reported to someone in the Air Force as they worked their way up the chain of command. And it was such a labyrinth and such a mess that by the time it came time to figure out who was really giving the orders, once something went wrong, it was never exactly clear who did not provide the adequate guidance to the man on the ground.
Our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen give the best of themselves. They fight very well, even when there is adverse publicity. They actually are in there doing their very best. The command above them, this multi-service, highly bureaucratic command, where all the different elements want to sort of share out the action, always gives them complex, awkward, compromised plans and orders that in a sense, destroy all their achievements.
The command bureaucracy that has evolved over the past 40 years has been accompanied by a dramatic swelling in the ratio of chiefs to Indians. At the end of World War II, we had around 12 million people on active duty. Of those, around 17,000 were high-ranking officers. But by 1983, with only around 2 million on active duty, there were still close to the same number of high-ranking officers, and even more generals and admirals. The philosophy being that if World War III came about, all we'd have to do is fill out the ranks. Congressman Les Aspin is chairman of the House Armed Services Committee.
But the assumption behind all of that is they're going to have the time to do it. And with nuclear weapons and jet aircraft and compressed time, it's very unlikely that we would have the kind of a mobilization effort that we had in World War II.
So as a result, critics contend Parkinson's Law has taken over, and work has been found for all those majors, commanders, colonels, and generals. The procurement industry, a good example of which can be found here. This is the main headquarters of the Air Force Systems Command at Andrews Air Force Base. It's a kind of mini Pentagon just down the road from the real one. And like the real one, it has sub-commands and divisions across the country. The Air Force doesn't research or manufacture its equipment at Systems Command. All it does here is block out the specifications for the planes and equipment it wants, then supervises their purchase. But here's the startling fact. In Air Force Systems Command, around 11,000 officers have the rank of major or above, including no fewer than 30 generals. This is the flow chart for headquarters only, and almost all of its 80-odd directorates is headed by a high-ranking officer. It was this bureaucracy that produced this $7,600 coffee pot for use on the C-5A transport plane.
So they turn it over to a design team to design a coffee pot. And those guys design a coffee pot. And let me tell you, what they have designed is a fantastic coffee pot. That thing will make coffee in 300 degrees below zero. It'll make coffee at 300 degrees above zero. If the pressure collapses in the plane, killing everybody in the cabin, that thing will still be making coffee. It's a fantastic coffee pot. But it's very expensive. In fact, the $7,000 some odd dollars, that was the low bid on that coffee pot. But what it is its design specifications run amok.
20 years in this command.
General Lawrence Scans is head of the Air Force Systems Command and a 20-year veteran of it. While appreciative of the hard work and expertise of the Systems Command staff, he's realistic about its shortcomings.
We now have an acquisition cycle where we have so many things and so many filters and wickets we have to go through before we can ever let a contract that the process is just stretching out and it's becoming more and more expensive. We are suffering from bureaucratic overload.
How much does it hurt you with these reports of enormously expensive coffee pots for aircraft?
Well, I think this constant drumbeat has hurt to a great degree. I think public opinion now has turned somewhat against us. And the unfortunate thing is when somebody talks about a $748 pair of pliers, we bought one pair in 1982. We've bought 3,100 pairs since for $3.10 a piece. And that never gets out.
Occasionally, a Maverick does come along, and sometimes shortcutting the bureaucracy works.
This is the Air Force's A-10, a craft designed for close air support for ground troops at the front line of battle. It's an Air Force staple in Europe and Korea. And this is the machine gun the plane was designed around, a powerful 7-barrel Gatling gun, which fires special 30-millimeter ammunition capable of piercing armor and destroying enemy tanks. Well, the Air Force procurement officer for this special ammunition calculated it would cost $75 to $80 a round to purchase through the Systems Command. A lot of money since this gun can shoot up to 4,000 rounds a minute. So he bypassed the procurement bureaucracy, went straight to two manufacturers, pitted them against each other, and got the Air Force a price of $13 a round.
How was that colonel rewarded? His career dead-ended. He took early retirement.
But if any one person within the system tries to do it, too often you get penalized rather than rewarded.
They are caught in a hierarchy where their own career depend on protecting the present system. So they have to be helped from the outside. And Congress made the present system by legislation. Congress will have to reform the present system by legislation.
How on earth do you reform a system as complicated as that?
Take an awful lot of work, mainly, though, through the spending, Barbara. If you hold down the spending, a lot of reform will take care of itself. And Congress is after that now. They've just passed a resolution to freeze spending at its present level for 1 year and have very modest increases for the next 2.
They're mad, aren't they, Congress?
That seems to be the mood. They're mad as hell, and they're not going to take much more of it. Secretary Weinberger says he's going to fight cuts, but an aide to Weinberger today is quoted as saying he sees the handwriting on the wall. So we'll see.
And that may be the last we see of that coffee pot. Thank you, Tom.
We'll be right back. You know, I was thinking what a leveler human tragedy is. In Mexico City, here's Placido Domingo, a great man, and he was right on the same plane with that poor man trying to desperately find
his wife and children.
Yes.
And the anguish today, the city which wants to demolish the buildings for health reasons, and the families who say, please, please, another day, maybe there'll be another life even after 7 days.
And maybe there are. We were learning things about human
endurance,
ability to endure.
That baby.
Well, right now, here's Ted Koppel with a word about tonight's Nightline. Ted?
Hugh, with one of the most powerful hurricanes ever threatening the eastern seaboard tonight, all the way up to the New England coast, we'll have live reports from weather experts, the Coast Guard, and some of our ABC News colleagues in areas along the path of this extremely dangerous storm.
That's Nightline following your local news. And that's 2020 for tonight. We're in touch, so you be in touch. I'm Hugh Downs.
And I'm Barbara Walters.
And for all of us at 2020, good night.
How big a threat is Hurricane Gloria? Tomorrow, meteorologist Dave Murray will have the latest on the hurricane. Also, should television networks and cable be regulated more closely? Hear both sides of the issue tomorrow on Good Morning America. Tomorrow, following Webster, Dad is snoring and everyone's roaring on the season premiere of Mr. Belvedere. Then, when Arnold's stepbrother disappears, will Arnold ever see him again on the premiere of Different Strokes? Later tonight, explore modern world structures on Eye on Hollywood.
or transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $3 to Journal Graphics, Box 2020, Ansonia Station, New York, New York, 10023. This has been the ABC News Magazine 20...